Today, in Great Stories in Bioethics, I want to tell you the story of Jim Pitman, a great medical dean at UAB who supported me for 20 years and really was very critical to my career in bioethics. This is Great Stories in Bioethics, my personal YouTube channel. So in 1975, when the Karen Quinlan case was going on, Jim Pitman was very interested. He had already been the dean of the UAB Medical School a couple of years. As an undergraduate at Aviation College, he was fascinated by philosophy, wanted to major in philosophy, but worried it wouldn't get him into medical school at Harvard, so he majored in biology instead. But it was the result of the issues raised by the Karen Quinlan case that led him to first create a position in medical ethics in the medical school, secondly, to hire me, and thirdly, more extraordinarily, to require the course of all 165 medical students. That was quite a job and quite a thing to do. But over the next 34 years, I taught such a course in our medical school, and while he was dean, he always supported me. When I first got the job, I went into his office and I said, well, Dean Pitman, just what is this medical ethics I'm supposed to teach? And at 6 feet tall, with twinkling blue eyes and white hair and a long white coat, he laughed very heartily and said, well, now that you got the job, it's whatever you say it is. Get to work. But he encouraged me to write books, to travel at conferences, to learn about bioethics, publish op-eds. He seemed to always have my back, for which I was very grateful. I published my first book, kind of a trade book. I called Ethical Options in Medicine. Wasn't very good. He still bought 300 copies and sent one to every bioethicist and medical administrator in the country. In 1983, when I published an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, he was thrilled, made copies and laminated them and sent them to all the faculty at UAB. When I signed a contract with McGraw-Hill, which he admired, and had my first textbook, and he arranged for a book signing party. He loved books, like my own father. And both he and James Rachels were father figures to me through books. He loved a bookstore called Smith and Hardwick in Birmingham. And if he liked a book, he would buy 20 copies. And then he would give it to people he liked. And I give a copy. I probably have got 100 books from Jim Pitman, often signed. He kept that bookstore alive. In the early 80s, when I went on TV to talk about a subject, I was wearing a white shirt and a tie. And he called me later and said, don't we pay you enough to buy a suit? I went out and bought a suit. The pay actually became an issue very quickly because at first, the medical school was paid half my salary, but I was just paid as an assistant professor of philosophy, which wasn't much. And suddenly, I wasn't just teaching a dozen students in undergraduate philosophy class. I was teaching 165 medical students for a month or two at a topic I really had to kind of vet on myself. And when I went to conferences, I found out that a lot of other bioethicists in medical schools were making 4 and 5 times what I was making and teaching 20 people. Eventually, I threatened to quit, and C.W. Scott and Pittman arranged to radically change my salary structure. Basically, they started to pay 2/3 of my salary, and it was a lot more, suddenly, much more like it should have been. A couple of times, he tried to get me to fly with him. He loved flying. He offered to show me how to fly upside down. I declined. I get airsick very quickly. Once he basically made me fly with him to a very obscure little town in South Alabama called Valley, where we had a hospital and there was some kind of breakfast talk, and they wanted more than medical ethics. I told him I had a 10:30 class, but we left at 6. We got down there at 7. We had breakfast and a talk at 7:30. I was back at the airport by 10, and I made my 10:30 class. That was the only time I've ever flown in a small plane, and the only time I flew with Pittman. He loved the Aviation Museum out by our airport, and he loved teaching other people how to fly. He married his wife, Connie. He met her in the Harvard Med School, where he went He loved Harvard Med School. And because of her, he welcomed diverse students to our medical school and undergraduate population. He helped create the early medical student acceptance program, which I later came to direct and have directed for 30 years. And at the beginning, there were many, many Asian and Indian students from ethnically diverse backgrounds, many of whom won prestigious scholarships like Rhodes Scholarships, Fulbright Scholarships, Marshall Scholarships. It was partly because of Connie that he appreciated this. He also sent my wife and I to a medical ethics conference in China in 1988 in Xi'an, where I started to mentor a doctor named Xu Dapu, who later became a very important minister in China. He admired an Israeli internist named Shimon Glick, and when Dr. Glick had a conference in Jerusalem, and again supported me to go there and present on medical ethics. My wife and I came along on both of those trips. He was very generous this way. Once there was a controversy in Birmingham about urologists when they referred patients to a kidney stone buster called a lithotripter for getting money back. And I said this was a kickback and should not be done. And some urologist called him up and said, "You should fire Pence. He has no business criticizing us." And Pittman retorted, "You shouldn't be kicking kickbacks. Pence is here to stay." When some medical students conspired to pie me in class, and one did it, he was furious. He took it as a personal insult to all faculty. He wanted to expel the student. We eventually compromised on a student honor court. And as you know what their sentence was, I criticized a coroner at Cooper Green Hospital for taking corneas without the consent of families. Again, I got criticized. Jim tried to hire the best people in the country for our faculty and then brought in some real superstars. It's partly because of him that in my lifetime, the UAB went from a relatively small medical center to one of the biggest in the country, maybe the most hospital rooms anywhere in the Southeast, and probably one of the 4 biggest in the country. It is just amazingly big and prosperous. He loved to talk to star doctors and intellectuals. When I ran the lecture series, we jointly brought people to campus like Stephen Jett Gould. He opened his own little center for what he called the Center for Advanced Medical Study, which is basically a little brick building. He had Henry Kissinger opened it. And we both brought E.O. Wilson to campus many times. E.O. Wilson was a native-born Alabamian, a father of sociobiology, a Harvard professor. Once Pittman actually showed E.O. Wilson my book on cloning and had him sign it. It was a lovely breakfast. Pittman would do that all the time. He was just very generous. I don't think he really cared that much about money. Once at Grand Rounds, he was like, 300 people in Spain Auditorium. I was sitting in the back row with him and a very famous researcher named Eric Sorsher, who did gene therapy for cystic fibrosis. Eric just sort of casually mentioned that he had been turned down for a grant and he needed a piece of equipment. It cost about $2,000. And I saw Pittman whip out his checkbook and just write him Eric a check for $2,000 and said, "Go buy it." Eric looked kind of stunned, but that was Pittman. Luckily for me, he was a very long-serving medical dean. I later found out that most medical deans served 6 or 7 years. And after Pittman, we had some deans that only lasted like 2 or 3 years. There's probably been 10 medical deans since Pittman, lots of associate deans. So I was very, very lucky to have Pittman for almost 20 years. I also had Jim Rachels for 26 years. Both of them were really important as mentors, along with Kirk Avent, also from Harvard Medical School, who was my clinical mentor. All these, if you want to be a bioethicist in a medical school or a hospital, you really need important clinical mentors, people who will have your back or high up in the administration. When his wife, Connie, died unexpectedly, it was a great blow to him. This was after he had stepped down from being dean, and it wasn't too much longer after that he started to develop dementia. His sons kept him in his house in Mountain Brook his whole life with a live-in caretaker. I visited him several times. He would take me up to his attic, take any book you want. And his attic was just filled with thousands of books. Before he died, he wrote a lovely biography of Tinsley Harrison, who had been his mentor when he was chief internal medical resident at UAB. And Harrison was like one of the fathers of internal medicine. He wrote, of course, Harrison's Principles of Internal Medicine, great book. The last time I visited him, it was sad. He knew me, but he really didn't know who I was. We still had a good visit. Jim Pitman was a great medical dean, a great friend of bioethics. He did a lot for Birmingham and a lot for UAB Medical School and Hospital. We all miss him. I still miss him. That's it for today. If you like it, share, give me a thumbs up. See you next Tuesday.